Here is a quick overview of what we will cover. We will cover what is macroeconomics, persistent cycles with behavioral nonlinearities, Phillips as the first system dynamics modeler in economics, Friedman and the Nehru, adding prices to a flowchart model with debt, application, a lending boom and slowdown, summary, how the lecture fits together. We will start with the foundations, build step by step, and end by tying the ideas together. Macroeconomics looks at the big picture of the economy, focusing on how production, distribution, and consumption work together. Put more directly, macroeconomics is the study of the overall economy, including factors like national income, unemployment rates, and inflation. For instance, when analyzing the national unemployment rate, macroeconomics helps us understand how many people are out of work and why. What this example shows is that how macroeconomics provides insights into the health of the economy and the effectiveness of policies aimed at reducing unemployment. Understanding macroeconomics is essential for developing effective economic policies that can stabilize or grow an economy. Once that is clear, the next step is persistent cycles with behavioral nonlinearities, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. What's going on? Put more directly, linear functions interacting ultimately reach an endpoint equilibrium or breakdown. For example, a predator-prey model makes the point clearly. Once populations feed back on one another, the path depends on the interaction, not on one variable by itself. What this example shows is that the same system can respond very differently depending on its starting position and the feedback forces acting on it. This matters because economics often assumes stable equilibrium, when real systems can be unstable, path-dependent, and sensitive to shocks. Once that is clear, the next step is Phillips as the first system dynamics modeler in economics, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. His 1954 paper, Stabilization Policy in a Closed Economy, included a circuit diagram. As part of this model, he postulated a nonlinear relationship between the level of production and the rate of change of factor prices, which he drew as opening paragraph of his 1954 paper. Recommendations for stabilizing aggregate production and employment have usually been derived from the analysis of multiplier models using the method of comparative statics. Put more directly, this type of analysis does not provide a very firm basis for policy recommendations for two reasons. For example, in macroeconomics, the wage bill is not one isolated number. It comes from wages interacting with employment. What this example shows is that the same system can respond very differently depending on its starting position and the feedback forces acting on it. This matters because economics often assumes stable equilibrium when real systems can be unstable, path-dependent, and sensitive to shocks. Once that is clear, the next step is Friedman and the Nehru, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. Given Friedman's assumptions that the economy starts in long-run equilibrium. For example, in macroeconomics, the wage bill is not one isolated number. It comes from wages interacting with employment. What this example shows is that the same system can respond very differently depending on its starting position and the feedback forces acting on it. This matters because economics often assumes stable equilibrium when real systems can be unstable, path-dependent, and sensitive to shocks. Once that is clear, the next step is adding prices to a flowchart model with debt, because it develops the next piece of the same argument. The definition-based approach shows Fisher's logic was correct. For example, in macroeconomics, the wage bill is not one isolated number. It comes from wages interacting with employment. What this example shows is how adding prices to a flowchart model with debt changes the behavior of the whole system once real feedback and interaction are present. This matters because the lecture is building a model of the economy that behaves like the real world, rather than a simplified textbook world. Once that is clear, we can pull the whole lecture together and see the full logic in one connected chain. Consider a hypothetical economy where banks begin lending aggressively into housing and business investment. At first, spending rises and the system looks healthy, but the key lesson is that money, debt, asset prices, and income are moving together, not separately. That means the boom cannot be understood with a one-variable or static equilibrium model. Once lending slows, the same feedback loops run in reverse. Spending weakens, asset prices soften, and repayment pressure rises. The application shows why credit systems have to be taught as dynamic processes rather than as neutral background machinery. Return to the lending boom example. What is Macroeconomics explains why the economy cannot be understood by tracking one variable in isolation. Persistent cycles with behavioral nonlinearities, and Phillips as the first system dynamics modeler in economics show why the standard model misses how credit, spending, and income interact through time. Friedman and the Nehru identifies the mechanism that keeps the boom going while balance sheets expand. Adding prices to a flowchart model with debt then explains why the same process can reverse once lending slows and repayment pressure takes over. The synthesis is that money and credit are not background details. They are part of a dynamic system whose feedback loops shape both the expansion and the downturn.